Hey TCSTV viewers, it's Evelyn here from the Camera Store. Thank you for tuning in here tonight for capturing wedding and portrait moments with Justine Milton. I'll be introducing her shortly, but before then, I want to let you know that this is a very special TCSTV Live because it's part of our series to celebrate the Camera Store's 25th anniversary of being in business. And we have a bunch of things happening all month long. This week in particular, we have special promos, including some accessory bundles for all kinds of products, including the Fujifilm X-T4. So you can check out all the great deals at thecamerastore.com. Plus, we have a bunch more virtual events coming up with lots next week because that is our official anniversary week. So you can check out those at thecamerastore.com. And because it is our Fujifilm days here right now at the Camera Store, we have KEH offering some virtual used gear buying event. So if you have any old gear and you're thinking of buying a Fujifilm camera, now is the time to do it. So you can go to thecamerastore.com and you can book a virtual session under our blog. You can get all the details and you can actually get a bonus of 15% up to $350 on top of your credit for that used gear. So it's a great time if you're in the market for a Fujifilm camera or anything else photography related because of all of our celebrations. I also want to let you know that Fujifilm is doing a giveaway contest in partnership with the Camera Store. And so if you head over to our Instagram page at the Camera Store, you can enter to win an X Series camera. And the deadline to enter that is tomorrow, September 10th. So make sure you get on that. But yeah, there's so much going on. So make sure you check out all of the 25th anniversary stuff at thecamerastore.com or pop into the store and come say hi and give everyone a celebration toast. And if you've registered for the event, we'll let you know that we are going to be sending out an email with some exclusive offers that we can't list online. So if you didn't register for this event and you want to take part in that, you can send me an email to evelyn@thecamerastore.com. And we can send those special offers to you directly, as well as a survey about the event. There's also a bunch of work happening behind the scenes tonight. We have our TCSTV Live Dream Team, including Drew, Jeff, and Riley from the Camera Store. And of course, we are live, which means anything can happen. Hopefully everything goes well. But if there's any issues, of course, we'll keep you up to date in the comments. But thank you again for joining us live tonight. Part of the live streams that we love is that you can interact with us. So be sure to join the chat while we have Justine with us. You can ask lots of questions throughout. This is going to be a very interactive Q&A style event. So we hope you join us there. And if for some reason you're not logged into YouTube and you want to still ask questions, you can email me your questions to evelyn@thecamerastore.com and I'll make sure to check those as well. So I'm going to introduce our guests right away. And thank you to Fujifilm for sponsoring this, by the way, and putting together the special offers. If you're not already familiar with our guest tonight, her name is Justine Milton, and she's a professional wedding photographer with many years of experience in the wedding industry. And she has roots in photojournalism as well as film photography. So she's developed her own unique style for her fine art, portrait, and wedding photography. She has a passion for genuine smiles, raw emotions, and preserving the story of a special occasion from start to finish. So capturing moments exactly as they happen, and she does it using Fujifilm's GFX system. And so that's why we have Fujifilm sponsoring us tonight, because we think it's a perfect tie-in. So welcome to the Camera Store, Justine. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So before we get started, I thought maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into wedding and portrait photography. I understand you had a photojournalism background.
Yes, so I took a photography course as part of my university degree. It wasn't something I planned on doing, but I thought it was a bit of a waste to pay tuition to paint or sculpt, which sounded fun in my own time, but not so much for a class. So I took this photography course and I just happened to be good at it. At the time, they were teaching film still, and I was outraged that they were teaching film. I was like, digital is new, why don't we teach this? And it's kind of a big slap in the face now because my passion is film and it's what I absolutely love. But that's kind of how I learned the basics. And then from there, I was working for a wedding catering company at the time in university. And the owner of that company said to me one day, oh, one of the other girls is, she's going to photograph a wedding. She can make like $1,000 in a day. And I went, that'd pay tuition a lot faster. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. I have a camera. I could do that. And I posted an ad on Kijiji and I booked my first wedding. I charged them $150. I had never really photographed people before that, but I took a risk and it definitely worked out in the end for me. And that's pretty much how I got to start in weddings. Throughout that, I worked for the university newspaper, and that was my photojournalism kind of thing. That was, they spent a long time explaining aperture and which direction the number had to go to make the background blurry. That took me a long time to figure out. And I shot a lot of the sporting events and all kinds of speeches and basically anything that went on around the U of A for photojournalism, and that was pretty much it.
Can you talk a little bit about your experience with film and how you did a lot of your work kind of early on, a lot of your weddings, shooting film, and how that shaped your style and your color palette today?
Yeah, so in university it was all black and white. We developed it all ourselves, and then from there, though, I shot digital for a number of years. But my favorite photographer that I would always come back to those photos, and his book that I read religiously, and I would actually take it in the car with me to every wedding I went to reference. I'd open it and read it right before I'd go and shoot. He shot film, and one day I just decided, I think it was 2014, I just decided if I want to be the best, I need to shoot the best. And at the time, I thought all of that meant I need to shoot film. So I hopped on eBay, bought this really old film camera. It's as old as me. I think they quit manufacturing them in the early 90s. I bought a Contax 645, and I bought some film. And then a few months later, the first time I used it was a trip to Paris with my mom. And I had this big styled shoot set up at a chateau. It was beautiful. And I had no film, though. So we had to try to hunt down some film in Paris. Thankfully, I speak French, so this wasn't as hard of a task as it could have been. And then I also had to get the man in the film shop to show me how to load the film, because I didn't know how to do that. And then we got to the chateau. I forgot how to load the film. So we had to borrow the model's phone, because we didn't have data in Paris back in 2014. It was too expensive. So anyways, I had to YouTube how to load film all over again, and I completely underexposed all the images. I didn't have a light meter. Didn't know what I was doing. I really didn't. I just thought, if I use the camera and the film, it will be magic. It wasn't. I applied all my same presets to the photos, and they were so-so. But it kind of sparked this little bit of joy in me that I wanted to continue pursuing. And so I stuck with it. I took a couple workshops that year that really taught me not quite the basics, but all of the fine point stuff that I needed to know about film. And I basically just practiced a bunch. And then the next year I pretty much went full film for all my weddings, and that was the way it was until I bought my 100S. And I've been shooting with my Fujifilm GFX ever since. And I've been shooting a little bit less film, which is kind of heartbreaking, but Fuji also quit making film. So I didn't have a lot of options.
Touché. Well, since we're talking about your style and your color palette, could you show us some of your photos and we can maybe talk through some of them?
Yeah, I would love to do that. So let me put this in full screen. There we go. So these are just a handful of wedding images from this year, all with the Fuji GFX 100S. The family ones are with the new 50S2. And I really I like true to life colors, not too bright, not too dark. I really like black and white. And I really like the kind of rich, what I would call the Fuji greens, where they're a little more blue tone, and that comes from the film color palette. Whereas the Kodak film, the greens are more yellow, but Fuji is known for this very kind of purpley blue and bluish tone green. And that's really nice, and that's where I've kind of pulled all of my editing inspiration, I guess, from into making my colors on digital cameras look as similar to those film tones that I can get. So these are some of my favorites, I guess.
So when you say that you're utilizing some of the different Fujifilm color aesthetics, are you shooting raw files, or are you using some of their JPEG presets, the film simulations? What does your workflow look like there?
So on the GFX right now, I am shooting in RAW and editing those. I don't really have a preset that I found that works for the 100S files, so I'm just kind of hand tweaking each one until I find some consistency, and then I'll make my own preset for that. But it's still a newer thing to me, so it's not quite as easy as a one-click preset just yet.
Yeah, let's go back to some of these images here.
So this was the one I just photographed yesterday.
Oh wow, beautiful.
So this was in studio, just natural light, which was nice. And then out in the mountains, it was kind of smoky.
Yeah.
Again, it's always smoky when I'm in the mountains, apparently. Yeah. And then just kind of like true to life is really what I aim for with all of the coloring. And I mean, when I first bought my GFX 100S, I did shoot JPEG for the first probably 2 months. And that was because I didn't love the raw files. They were really different than obviously editing my film scans, which come back and they're pretty much perfect. And I really struggled with it, but I stuck with it, and it wasn't an easy learning curve. I will be honest about that. But I think if I was used to editing raw files to begin with, it wouldn't have been as hard. And then I eventually got used to it, and now I'm fairly happy with where they're at.
So when you're photographing both weddings and portraits, what are some of the things that you're looking for to make the images the style that you want? And like, what makes a good portrait image in your mind?
So lighting is like the most important thing for me. I'm fairly particular with that. Like, I don't like to say no to my couples, but if they want photos in a canola field at 1 p.m. or something, I'm going to say no. I want the lighting to be really flattering, fairly even. I still want it to be interesting though. I don't ever want kind of just flat, boring light. That's the most important thing for me. And then after that, I would say a connection between the people, whether it's a couple or a family. I want you to feel something when you see the image, or I want it to be a moment or just something that makes it like unforgettable.
When you're setting up your shots, I have to ask, last night you were posting that you were burning the midnight oil, you were working late, you were gluing fabric and doing all this prep work for your weddings. So what do you use that for, and how do you fit it into your wedding work?
So a number of years ago, probably around like 2014 when I started shooting film, it was becoming more and more popular to like do flat lays and like style all of the elements of the day really nicely. And I was always struggling with that because I didn't always get all of these like super fancy, really expensive stationery suites and all of these details that all these photographers I saw online, mostly in California or the States, that they were getting. I wasn't getting that. And so to try to make my stuff look higher end and fancier than I guess it was, I built a little styling kit. It's actually quite a big styling kit, but I started adding pieces into this slowly that I can then bring with me to make all of those a little bit better and fancier and I guess more polished looking. And so one of those big things is the backdrop that you're shooting on. I used to just shoot on like a bed sheet because that was like flat and white. I've come a long way since. And I've used bridesmaids dresses and those kinds of things, but it's easier to just bring my own. And so velvet doesn't wrinkle easily, and so I don't have to iron it every time. And it generally looks pretty good, and it photographs well. There's not like too much shine to it. So I was gluing the edges so they didn't shed everywhere of all of this velvet fabric to shoot all of these details on.
Yeah, not always glamorous work, but it makes it glamorous. Now, we were both lucky enough to get our hands on the new GFX 50S2, which is the latest addition to Fujifilm's GFX lineup. And of course, shameless little plug, if you want to hear more about the tech stuff, you can check out our review after you watch tonight. Or we also did a tech talk with Billy and Francis from the Fuji guys. So if you want to hear more about that. But I want to know practically what you thought of the camera and how it fit into your work, that you've been super busy lately. So what did you think of it? How did it work for you?
Okay, so I was really excited to try this, because I have been struggling with the raw files from the 100S to get like my perfect coloring. And so when I heard that the new 50S had the same sensor, which would mean the same coloring as the old ones, which everybody seems to love so much, I was really, really excited about this, because I was like, a similar camera with better coloring would be so much better. So that was like my biggest yay kind of moment about that camera. And the coloring actually isn't that different. It is like a little bit easier, yes, but it's not a huge difference. The biggest difference I did notice was that in the 100S, I seem to have a hard time getting saturation in like the oranges and reds and like that pinky tone in the skin. And like if I pull up my HSL sliders in the saturation, it doesn't largely affect the skin, which is really odd. So like finding that tone in the skin with the 100S is hard, but with the 50, it's there. You have all that saturation in the skin, which I really liked. If you go to the screen here, I've got some of these family photos that I did, and these were all with the 50S2. And I did use autofocus for all of these ones. And so the autofocus is, I mean, this little guy I think is like 3 and he's very busy. And I mean, for this one, we have it on video where he was like looking at us, looking everywhere else, and then turned around and gave his mom a quick kiss on the hand. And like the camera is fast enough to focus on that and catch that exact moment. And that's, I mean, I don't know how much more you need in a camera. So for me, it's more than fast enough for all of those little moments, which I loved. It is the same body as the 100S, which is nice so that like I don't have to try to think between switching. I can just shoot the exact same way. The fingers, the buttons, everything works the same for me, so that was nice. And I mean, I guess all my lenses fit, so that's nice.
Yes. Well, let's talk about 2 things that you mentioned here. So one was just about the color tonality and like the quality of the images, specifically when it comes to skin tones. And I think that's a really interesting thing because the internet has kind of chewed on this camera a little bit, saying that it's an older sensor. But I find it very fascinating that, you know, as a professional portrait and wedding photographer, you're talking about the positive qualities of, you know, that the sensor is so good and a lot of people love it. And so I think there's more to the story than sometimes often gets talked about when we are talking so much about gear, when it comes to actually practically using those images. So thanks for sharing that. Also, you mentioned with the autofocus that it's fast enough for you to be able to capture those little moments. And of course, everything that we're talking about tonight is about capturing those moments, whether it be at a wedding event or, as you say, you know, a family shoot. There's lots of little micro events that happen. And, you know, I have little kids too. And so those fleeting little opportunities sometimes can pass by very quickly. So let's talk about what you normally do when it comes to focusing. You told me before we got started that you actually shoot a lot of your portrait work manually focusing. So your perspective might be different than others.
Yeah, so I am very used to shooting on my film cameras. And for me, my cameras are like an extension of my body. And so switching cameras, like that's also part of why I hated my Fujifilm camera at first, is because it was just different. And I'm so used to having that Contax 645 in my hands that it feels like home and it feels like a piece of me. And when I switched, I was like, this is just too many new things. And I didn't know the menus. I didn't know the buttons. I was a little overwhelmed with like, I can't do my job if I don't know this piece of equipment like inside and out. And so I bought an adapter and used my old film lens from my Contax on that camera. And as soon as I did that, I could breathe a little sigh of relief, and it felt a little more like home in my hands. And then I feel like do a little bit of a better job with what I was doing because I wasn't so focused on learning everything new. And so it just kind of stuck. I mean, it's a beautiful lens. It's a Zeiss lens. It's an 80mm 2.0. And the adapter does have autofocus. It's just really slow. So I just manually focus it on everything. And so when I do get my 50S2 in the mail, I will use that with my manual focus lens and keep the quick autofocus on the 100S for my Fujifilm lenses.
Okay. And which lenses do you do most of your work with, and like what kind of scenarios would you use different focal lengths?
All right, so if we go back to the computer screen here, so this is the 80mm Zeiss, and like it's kind of hazy because the veil's kind of in the way. And then this is the 81.7, the Fuji 81.7. That was the first one I bought, and I absolutely loved it. And then the reception shots. So for the reception, I have been using all of the Fujifilm lenses just because it's nice to have that quick autofocus for moving things. And for the reception, I like to shoot dual bodies because I don't like to change lenses and I don't like zooms. I always find it easier to just move my feet than to like pick a focal point, because I know what the frame looks like with my 2 focal lengths. So I shoot the 45, and depending on the space, either the 110 or the 80. And then for ceremonies, I do the same thing, the 45 and then the 110 or the 80. I only use those 3 lenses. And then I'll use the Zeiss 80mm for some portraits. And then I bought a couple of baby lenses to use with my GFX as well. Just for like some fun artsy kind of images, and those are wider angles as well.
Now, a lot of these photos are set up in a way that you'd almost pose them, I would imagine, but they don't look posed. So can you talk a little bit about how you actually work with your subjects and get them to be in a more natural state when you're trying to capture them in a specific spot, when you want to get, like the sun backlighting that couple, or like how do you make the magic happen?
Yes, that's a good question. So first of all, lighting is the most important part of my job, really. I am basically an expert on like the sun and where it will be at any given moment of the day. I'm like a human sundial. I can walk outside and be like, it's this time based on the shadow. And that's really important for my job though, because I can be location scouting for a wedding a couple days before, and the wedding might be at 3, but I'm location scouting at like 9 a.m. and I need to look and go, the sun will be here, the shadows will be here. This is where I'm gonna shoot the couple. And so for me, once I have the lighting, I'll kind of just direct the couple. I don't really pose them. I mostly give them actions and directions just because I want it to be natural. And like, if we waited for a candid moment, like a truly candid moment to happen, and like it to be perfectly flattering, like you see on TV and stuff, we'd be waiting forever. So I just kind of create those moments because it's a faster way and you're on a timeline and you get more photos that way. So basically I will set them up in the lighting that I want. And by that, I mean, I say like, come stand right here. And then they'll stand wherever I tell them to. And then I'm like, all right, you're gonna hold hands and walk away from me. You're gonna look at each other as you do, tell each other some jokes, whisper a dirty joke in her ear, give each other a kiss, a hug. Like I kind of also, not quite overwhelm them with actions, but I'll give them multiple things to do at a time, just so that they're not ever like stiff and just standing there, because I don't want them to be stationary for too long, because then they'll start to be like, oh, this is weird, this is awkward, why am I just standing here? And like it'll start to show in their body language.
Could you show us a couple examples and tell us maybe what you would be telling them to do?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's what all these hand signals over
like,
to my right were.
Do you tell them to like think about specific things? Or?
Okay, so for like this one, I was like, all right, scoop her up and you're just gonna walk away from me. And I had the veil and I was like kind of passing it back and forth in front of me, because I lately have been into like creating some weird kind of artsy images. I don't know, it's just been a thing I've been into lately. So I was doing that and he was kind of walking and I was just swishing the veil back and forth, and I was like, all right, kiss, all right, tell a joke. Like I just kind of do a bunch of those things as I'm shooting. This is one of my favorites. When couples walk down the aisle of the ceremony, I always tell them beforehand, I'm gonna make them do this. But when they're walking down towards me, this is like my best tip that I only tell my associate shooters, so now everybody's gonna know.
Oh, we're getting a tidbit.
I love this shot because it kind of shows the whole church and like everybody in the background, which I really love. And I always tell them to kiss when they get to the end of the aisle. And like most people don't remember, but you're the only one for them to look at. So I just kind of go, and then they kind of get the point and then they kiss. And it's always one of my favorites from the day. And it's like, again, they're already walking, they're leaving the ceremony, they're absolutely elated, and then they kiss, and it's a very natural kind of.
Yeah, you can feel it. They're like, yes, we did it.
So like this, I'll be like, hold hands, walk towards me. Another hot tip, I always have the groom put his hand in his pocket because I like to finish the pose. I don't like dangling limbs a lot. So like in the undirected one here, you can see his hand is just dangling. Not a huge fan of that, but it's like, this is more of a truly candid thing. Whereas hand in pocket, that's like one of my just finish the pose off things. And then so as they're walking, I'll be like, oh, give her a kiss on the hand, or look back at me if they're walking away from me, or lean in, give her a kiss on the cheek, or any little things like that that just help add to the movement and make it kind of more interesting. Also, like, I really like connection points. So the more that the couples are kind of connected and touching, the more intimate it feels, versus like the further away they are, the more whimsical it kind of feels. And so like if they're just gonna be standing there, like, the fact that she's like holding both hands onto his and stuff like that, it makes it feel a little more connected and together, which I really like. So again, they were just walking towards me and I said, lean in and kiss. Just something simple like that. They were walking, the whole family was walking away. It was a simple direction to walk away, look at each other. And then I, yelled out the mom's name and I was like, hey, look back at me. And that way it's just kind of a, oh, hello. Like it would, in a movie, if they just naturally did this, you would believe it, but we have to kind of fake it, so.
So then when you are directing them, with your photojournalism background, do you find that you're sort of predicting like certain moments that are going to happen, and like how do you become skilled at that? Is there ways to practice?
That's a really good one, actually. So for the long time, I did say like I'm only good at this because I can predict what's going to happen, and
like the sun.
Yeah, like the sun, yeah. And the more I've done this, the more I've kind of learned a few things about it. So like, I mean, if you're around humans, you kind of know how they're going to react to certain things. And so when we're shooting wedding receptions, for example, you know, someone's kind of leading into a joke, you get ready, you know people are going to laugh. It's a pretty easy thing to predict. But the more I got into this, we would shoot a lot of weddings in other countries or other places, or even here, but speeches would be in a different language. And then I didn't know if a joke was coming or not, so it made it very hard to predict if people were going to laugh at a certain time. So that was kind of an interesting challenge to that. But for the most part, it's just knowing how people are going to react. And like, for example, okay, if your husband tells you, or your partner or spouse, whatever, tells you a funny joke, do you roll your eyes? Yeah, most of the time, probably. If they tell you a dirty joke, do you laugh? Most of the time, probably. So that's just one tip with my couples. Like, I used to say, tell her a funny joke, and she would kind of groan and like roll her eyes. And then I switched to saying, tell a dirty joke, and then I got way better laughs and way better reactions and expressions out of that. So it's kind of knowing how people will react to certain situations and like certain prompts that can give you better results, I guess.
So we have a question here in the feed just about gear. If aperture for medium format also changes with respect to 35 millimeter and how focal length does. So we won't get too technical into it, but there are different equivalencies depending on if you're shooting full frame or 35 millimeter versus medium format. But basically, when you're shooting with like an f2 lens on a medium format, you're going to get the look of having shallower depth of field compared to the same thing on a 35 millimeter. But the caveat to that is equivalency works both ways, and so it can get a little bit complicated to explain. But did you have any insight on that at all?
So my life is very confusing with this because we have the Fuji medium format system, our medium format film system, and then we have Fuji's X-T4 system. So nothing we own is like a full frame equivalent, and none of our focal lengths are what they say they are. But basically an 80, let's just say approximately a 50. An 80 on medium format is like give or take a 50.
Yeah,
that's exactly kind of just what we roll with.
Perfect. Getting back into some of the posing questions, because I find this really fascinating. But when you have couples or families where there's lots of different heights or maybe different sizes or different skin tones, do you have any tips on how to work with them and how to create flattering images?
Yeah, so I don't often have a huge height difference, and when there is, the couples are like very aware of it, and they're usually like, by the way. And so oftentimes, you know, when they're walking and stuff, it is what it is. That's the way they are, and I want to capture that naturally. But for any of the close-ups where like I might have them touching noses or be a little closer, we'd, you know, try to find a hill or a rock or something for one of them to stand on. It's nothing glamorous, but that's what we do. And that way we can at least get them face to face for some of that. You mentioned like plus size.
Yeah, different sizes.
Yeah, so that's something that I'm honestly not like really good at it because I haven't had a lot of experience with it. But I know like a few of the basic things is like, you know, I like to personally I do things a bit differently than most. I guess I find out like if people have insecurities, I'm like, hey, tell me your preference. Like, do you have a side of your face you like better? All those things. Like, you know, personally, this is my good side. I look like a stroke victim on this side. It's very important to me. And a lot of my other brides have the same thing. And a lot of couples are, mostly families, when I photograph them, sometimes mom will be like, oh, I'm like a little insecure about this area. So it's like, okay, cool. We'll like put a kid in front of it, or well, like the way we have you like hug onto dad's arm or something. We just kind of like try to hide those that way because coming from film, but also just being bad with technology, I don't know how to use Photoshop. So like liquefy and those things, I'm like, this is totally out of my wheelhouse. I shoot it to get it right, and it is what it is.
Get it right in camera.
Like I can take out a zit. That's the extent of my abilities. I'm not kidding. It's sad.
Don't do plastic surgery after the fact.
Yeah, it's sad. I should learn, but at the same time, I'm like, this is like my sticking point on. I feel true to my art form in capturing what is real if I don't manipulate it. So
what I'm hearing is that there's a lot of benefit in just asking and just saying like, hey, is there anything that you want me to be aware of? Like just having that connection and conversation.
Yeah, like I'm really honest and upfront with people, and I mean, nobody's been upset with me yet by just asking these things, but it's easier if I know ahead of time than afterwards. So definitely. I think it's best to just be upfront with people and
We have a question here about what is the best focal length for a typical wedding? And I guess I'll add to that, if you just had one, could you shoot a whole wedding with one focal length?
Absolutely, I can. I have. I do. Yeah.
Yeah.
So on on my Contax 645 for the longest time, I only had an 80 mil, and I shoot everything with it. I shoot everything with an 80, and I could, and I would, and I love it. Which again, it's about the equivalent of a 50, closer to like a 58. Maybe
So
a 60.
when you say that, if someone is watching that doesn't have like any perspective of what that actually gives you, would you say that it's a pretty like natural look of the world? Just a little bit
very
more
much
zoomed
so.
in. Yeah.
So the 80 is actually more of a natural kind of field of view than a true 50 on a full frame camera would be, because it's just that little bit longer. And I didn't truly understand this until I had the Nikon 50 versus the 58. And when you put the 58 up to your eyes, you're like, you could just walk looking through the camera, and it was like accurate enough. It's a very flattering lens. It's not too wide, so it's not distorting anything. It's not too long. It does mean that you have to like move around a bit, and for receptions and things like that and ceremonies, I'm not shy. I get right up there if I need to, quickly, and then I move away. I'm not rude, but I do get in there if I need to, and then back up, and you just kind of make the most of it. It is advantageous to have a slightly wider one for moments when you need that, but I rarely need anything longer or much, much wider.
Question from Francis. Do you have any recommendations on what color clothing people should wear for photos that aren't wedding? And I guess to tie something into this, you do have a fairly consistent like palette on your website with your photos. So do you give any kind of direction to families or for your portrait work on what they should wear, what they shouldn't wear?
This is always a tough one. Yes, I do give them some direction. However, like my personal taste of what I wear in my family photos versus what I tell people to wear are two completely different things. I think if you like color, go with color, but like avoid neons. That's one thing. It just doesn't photograph well, like ever.
No, and they're like in style right now, kind of.
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't a big fan of the 80s. Yeah.
Throwing shade on neons. That's okay.
And I always say, like, try not to wear black, and especially like for a tux, different story. You've got the white that breaks it up and everything, and like don't all wear the same color top. Like if you're all wearing white or all wearing black, try to vary it up. Otherwise, you kind of just like blend into this blob, which isn't that great. I guess like matching, but not too matching. I mean, if you flip to the screen really quick here, this is like just a couple shots of my husband and my son, and like nothing fancy, but they're just in like their jackets because it was cold.
That's adorable.
But like they match enough. If it was a little more fall vibes, they'd go a little better. It's not like perfect, but in an ideal world, wait, gotta flip back to the family ones. We'd have a little more color, a little more variety. Or these guys where they had like the whites and greens, and that was all really nice.
So they complement each other,
yeah.
but they're not. Yeah.
And this family that was like all kind of like neutrals and whites and beiges and stuff.
Have you ever had a family show up to a shoot and they're all wearing like matching plaid or anything like that?
No, I tell them not to do that specifically.
Okay.
I'm like, I mean, unless you're specifically going for like that 90s vibe where you all wear jeans and a white shirt, I'm like, let's not do that. I do say like limit it to one pattern though, because otherwise it can be too much.
I have a question in the emails, and just a reminder to all the viewers, make sure you start joining the chat. We're starting to have more questions come in. I love it. But you can also email me, evelyn@thecamerastore.com. And so, yeah, we'll get to one of these here. This is a good one. So it's from Sahan. And if I was to take a family pic or say a couple at f2, how do you focus so that every person in the frame is not blurry? Or if I have to shoot a group, do I have to shoot at a higher f-stop number?
I'm just going to give away like all my best tips. Okay, so the number one most important thing, if you are going to shoot with a shallow depth of field, I know people always say like, you always hear your f-stop should be as high as the number of people in the photo. That's kind of crap. It only matters like where they are lined up. So if you have everybody, I like draw an imaginary line and I make them line their toes up. I do this for family formals at weddings. I'll shoot family formals at weddings at 2.8 at the absolute most, unless I have many rows. But I literally have a line and I'm like, line your toes up here, because if their feet are all lined up, their heads will all probably be in the same line. And I will stand so that my camera, the like focal plane of it would be directly parallel with the line of the people. So if you are perfectly parallel with them and they're all in one straight flat line, you'll have no problems shooting at a shallow depth of field and having everyone's face in focus. If, however, they are not all in a straight line, then yeah, you need to bump your f-stop up so that they're all in focus.
Awesome. That was a great tip. You are giving all your good tips away. I love it. Okay, some more from the chat here. How do you meter for a dark skin and a light skin couple?
Yeah, okay, I think this was part of one of your other questions, but I got a little sidetracked from it. So with this, it's not that different than shooting anything regularly, but lighting is going to be the most important thing. So if you're shooting, like we recently had my associate team photographed a wedding, and the bride was black and the groom was fairly white, actually. And so it's the darker the contrast, the harder it is to balance this out. But like, if there is any shadow at all being cast, and usually, you know, one person's always in a little bit more of a shadow, you have to make sure that that darker skinned person is getting more light on them, just so that you're not like underexposing anything too much, but you're also not overexposing the white skin too much. It's a fine balance of making sure that the lighting is absolutely perfect, and that will make the world of difference in getting those to balance out in post when you're editing.
So that brings me to another question. What do you do to control your lighting? Are you using reflectors, flashes, any other modifiers?
For portraits and stuff during the day, 98% of the time, I don't. Again, okay, I'm just going to give you all my tips here. I give up trying to keep anything. Okay, so when I'm shooting, the most important thing that I look for when I'm location scouting is what I call a natural reflector. So you will almost never see me put people in grass when it's sunny out, because everything on the ground is reflecting up in people's faces. So on that gray rocky beach that you saw me shoot on, I think in like 2 or 3 of these different sessions because I really like it, you'll notice that that's a very neutral reflector, which is really great because then any sun that's on that is going to be bouncing up in their face. So it's kind of like using a reflector, but just using what you have around you. So anything that's a neutral color is great for that. Any kind of like beigey dead grass, which does look nice, works really beautifully as a reflector. Essentially anything that's not like green grass or like red shale works really well. And if you are shooting in green grass, I just try to shoot in like where there's a little bit of shade so that there's not any hot spots of green reflecting up at them. Mm-hmm. If I'm desperate and I have no other option, I will bring a reflector and use that a little bit, but I mostly just try to keep them where there's natural reflectors. So like if there's a patch of grass and you want to shoot the family formals on a wedding day in that, and there's like a sidewalk, I will put them like a foot back from the grass so that the sidewalk isn't in the edge of the frame, but the sidewalk is acting as my natural reflector, bouncing a neutral color of light back in their face. So for portraits, no, I just use my surroundings really, really well. For receptions, I use all kinds of things. We created an online course earlier this year that teaches reception lighting for wedding photographers. And that is a bunch of off-camera flash and video light combination of setups. And down here in my little photos here, I have some examples. Here we go. These are a couple of my favorite reception images. And these are done with off-camera flash. They're just in black and white because I feel like the moment was better. I should have put a color one in here to show you, but this is all lit with off-camera flash. It was like pitch black out. It was nighttime, speeches, all that stuff. I was sitting like right in front of them in the best man's chair, actually. And I was shooting with my 45 mil on my Fuji, which is like a 30-ish maybe on full frame, I think. Yeah,
I don't know. I'm
maybe.
terrible with on-the-spot math, but
I think give or take, it's like a 30-ish. So fairly wide, but I was like right in front of them, and I just feel like that kind of gives me like an in-the-moment thing. Anyways, that's all done with flash. And then back here, this one was just with the video lights that the videographer had set up. Nope, that one's not with video lights. The videographer's left by then. That's just with the lighting from the sparklers that they provide and a long exposure.
okay, yeah, I was going to say that's beautiful light just from the little chandeliers and stuff.
Yeah, the sparklers put out a lot of light. And so that's just like ambient light.
So with that in mind, there's actually a question from Juan Lopez asking about I think it was from someone else here. They're asking if you would shoot a wedding without in-body image stabilization, like the 50S or 50R, because both the cameras that you're talking about have that in-body image stabilization,
Yeah.
which then means you have stabilization even for your adapted lens. So is that something that's very important to you?
No, not at all. My film camera doesn't have anything.
But are you shooting handheld?
Yeah, always.
Yeah.
This is a long exposure that's handheld on my screen here. Because of the in-body image stabilization, I could do this. Typically, if I would do that in film, I'd probably put it on a tripod to do that specific shot. But everything I shot on film would be at like 1/60th of a second or less, and I would handhold that. However, I am very steady. I could be a surgeon if I wanted to. I am very steady. My husband, on the other hand, shakes like a Parkinson's patient, and I don't let him handhold anything less than like 1/200th of a second. So he needs in-body image stabilization. It's really a personal preference, though, on what you need and what you prefer. For my shooting style, I don't need it, but like I said, my husband needs it.
Okay, here we go. So, do you have any tips for people that want to get into doing like portraits and wedding photography? You talked a lot about you just went for it. You put an ad on, was it Kijiji or Craigslist?
Yeah, Kijiji.
Kijiji. So do you have any sort of learning tips from that process and like jumping with 2 feet in? Is that the way to do it, or did you learn something from that experience?
So that was a tough one because like the general industry and people will be like, oh, you should second shoot first. You should know what you're doing at someone's wedding. Yeah, all of those things, yes. I didn't know any better, and the people that I was shooting for, they knew that. They knew I had never photographed people before, and they were okay with that because like they were paying $150. If I had second shot and knew what I was doing, it might have been closer to the thousands of dollars. So I think the big thing is if you're interested in shooting and you want to get into it, just practice. Practice with your friends, practice with family, post an ad on Kijiji if that's still a thing, maybe Facebook. Just find some people and practice a little bit. And then once you feel confident enough, you can charge people for it, and you can jump right into a wedding if you're like me. Just make sure that the couple knows what they're getting into, and try to be prepared as possible. With so much information on the internet these days, it's really easy to like see a wedding day and like see all the images that somebody would deliver and like know what you have to get and like find shot lists that you can download and all that kind of stuff. You can also email people to see if you can like assist with them or tag along and try to learn something that way. I had messaged a bunch of photographers when I was starting out to see if I could tag along with anybody, and most of them were very rude. One thing I've never forgot, this was like 11 years ago, this one photographer said, and like I'd sent them like my website, like the 10 photos I'd taken, and this one photographer was like, you know in American Idol when they think they can sing but they really can't and it's kind of embarrassing? And then he also told me that I'd never make a career out of photography, and if I knew his name, I would email him now. I wanted to send him like my first magazine cover and be like, oh yeah, but those things stick with you, and so other photographers should be nice to other photographers, and if they're willing to help you, that's great.
Before we got started tonight, we talked a little bit about clients, and you said that you've pretty much loved all your clients. And I mean, I think it's a testament to you and your style and everything that you'll tend to attract maybe different types of people depending on the aesthetic of your work and how you present yourself online. Can you talk a little bit about what's defined your style and just what are some of the things that have gone into creating your brand?
Yeah, so I guess I kind of always use the curse of the creative brain as an excuse for my lack of organization. But I am very much a creative at heart, and so I don't have a lot of rhyme or reason or planning behind what I do. I just kind of get inspired and do things. And while that's both good and bad, I do feel that like when I'm in the moment and I'm shooting and I'm inspired, that is when I create my best work. And I think that doesn't hold me back from it, but at the same time, I don't plan much and I'm not very organized, and like if you email me about things, I do forget to email people back all the time. And so like I am fairly open on social media about like who I am and what I am, and I'm like all over the place and people know that. And I think that helps with all my clients are like pretty chill and laid back, and most of them know, like, if I miss an email, I don't reply. They're like, hey, just wanted to see. And I'm like, oh yeah, sorry. They're all pretty calm and pretty laid back, which is really nice. And it does work for how I operate. I don't really get a lot of like diva brides, and the ones that like start out that way where they're like, I need somebody to hold my dress. I like pick their dress up. I'm like, stick your arm out, and I toss it over her arm, and I'm like, walk. And like they learn pretty quick that they're like, oh, I guess I don't need to do that. And it's like, yeah, man, you're good. So I guess I'm also really good at like mitigating any of those possible situations where like they need to have an entourage. Because I think it's hard to get like those intimate moments in photos with couples if you have an entourage. So I try to like get rid of all of that, and yeah.
Arwen has a good question about this. Do you include in your contract the number of images you'll give to your client for a wedding? And if so, how many images do you say?
Nope, every wedding's different. I take a different amount at every wedding. Different things happen. Sometimes you have to drive to the mountains, sometimes you don't. Sometimes everything's at one venue and 6 hours really feels like 10. I make no guarantee. I don't have like a minimum per hour even. There is nothing. It is just dependent on the wedding. I take images of whatever happens, the moments that happen, the portraits, and that's pretty much all I guarantee is that I will take photos of what happens.
So that goes back to more of your photojournalism background probably, and just how you kind of, you don't necessarily have like an exact shot list that you have to hit, but more so, again, those moments that you're trying to capture.
Yeah, like family formals is the only thing that we have a list for because we don't want to miss any family members. But everything else is like literally whatever I'm inspired by. Like most of the time I don't even pick locations ahead of time. People are like, the limo needs to know. I'm like, I'll tell them day of. Again, this only works for my clients because they're so great and they understand how I operate, because it's like, I want to wake up and I want to see the sky and like, is it smoky? Is it sunny? Is it cloudy? What is it doing? What location will be best for today? What do their outfits look like? How do I feel? I don't know. So I just kind of decide like, once I see everything, what will be best for that couple in that moment and that situation at hand, and then I just kind of pick all these things.
Awesome. And do you do the same approach for your family photos as well?
Well, I mean, for those, since we like have a meeting spot, it's usually at like one designated park kind of thing, but I do like to postpone if it's not sunny out. That's just a thing I implemented this year. I was like, I've been doing this long enough. I only want perfect weather for perfect photos. So I've been trying to do that because I like it to be sunny. But we usually just pick like one of, I don't know, the handful of parks in the city that are all beautiful. And I go to different places throughout them though. I'll just be like, let's go to the right. I've never been down here. Let's see what's down here. So we do some of that.
Awesome. So if you were to sort of sum up for your family photography, like some of your best tips, we talked a lot about some of your best wedding tips. What would you say is your number one thing about when you're working with families and little kids and their unpredictability? How do you factor that into your photography? So
pre-COVID, I used to bring like a little baggie of Sour Patch Kids that kids could just grab and have some, and sometimes it was one per smile. Honestly, though, toddlers run my sessions. I have no say in what happens when there's toddlers involved. Whatever they want goes. We just kind of do anything we can to keep them happy. If they want to throw rocks, all right, you throw rocks. If you want to run around, you run around. That's probably the biggest thing I do is I'm like, let's let things naturally kind of unfold, or let's try to give them an activity like, oh, can you smell the flowers? Or can you go and, pick that flower? Or, like little things like that where we try to give them an activity that'll like still look cute, but they're still in their element, because trying to get, like a 1.5 or 2-year-old to stand there and smile and look at you is, well, slim to nil. If you get that, you're lucky, but that doesn't always happen. And then my like really best kept secret, the way that I do get kids to look at my camera, I used this for a bunch of mini sessions last weekend. I tell them there's a little ladybug that lives inside my lens, and if they look really hard, they'll see it run across the lens. But here's the catch. The ladybug only comes out when it sees the whites of your teeth, because it really likes that. So then they're looking directly at the camera and smiling. It's pretty good.
That's very specific. I like that.
It's very specific, but it works.
Mickey Mouse and like, see if you can find Mickey Mouse in it. But that's a good one. Couple more questions from the chat here before we wrap this evening up. So just throw them more in the chat because we're going to end soon. But you talked a lot about that you don't like certain times of the day, like 1 p.m. shooting in the grass, and you only want to shoot in nice sunny conditions. Yeah. Do you have a favorite time of the day? This is a question from Francis.
I mean, sunrise and sunset are like close to. Sunrise is my favorite. I mean, like personally, no, I dread sunrise. But For shooting, yeah, I will get my butt out of bed that early for sunrise because you only end up with more light. So if you need more time, you have more light. It's easy, it's not a problem. I don't like to shoot like an hour before sunset because like it can get too dark and I don't like that. So I usually go about 2 hours before sunset or 3, depends on the location. That rocky beach that I showed you guys earlier is kind of like in a valley. So the sun tends to set a little bit early. So I go like 3 or 4 hours before sunset there so that I still get that sun peeking over the trees and it's like kind of warm and golden and beautiful, but it's not super harsh. And again, it also depends on the location. For something with a natural reflector like that, you know, for weddings, I don't get to pick the timeline. Sometimes I have to shoot at 1 p.m. More often than not.
For family weddings, do you have sort of like a specific timeline? Like say, okay, you're going to start 3 hours before sunset. Does that mean you're sort of blocking off like a 3-hour time window to do a family shoot? Or
oh gosh, no.
What do you tell them to expect?
Half an hour and an hour tops. Most family sessions, I mean, like my kid wouldn't pay attention for longer than 10 minutes.
I was gonna say neither would mine.
And I mean, my husband, he's pretty patient. He'll maybe do about a half hour, but I know a lot of husbands that'll do like 5 minutes and then they're like, hey, I'm done. No, but I just would rather have too much light than not enough.
A couple more questions here. Do you choose the images to give to your client, or do they choose of what I guess their final files would be?
So for weddings, I just call them down and give them like everything. Not everything, like the ones I've called out. And then for families, the last year I started doing proofing galleries. So that way I send them the unedited images, however many that may be, and then they pick which ones they want from that. And then I edit those ones and then deliver those. And I only started doing that last year, but I should have been doing it like 10 years ago because the amount of time it has saved me is amazing. I can shoot way more sessions because I am not editing 100 photos. I'm only editing like 10 or 20.
So is that what you say is pick out your top 10 or 20 images from the proofing gallery?
Yeah, so they're whatever like family package that they book comes with X number of images, and then if they want to purchase more, it's an additional price and they can do that. And so I just tell them to pick their favorites, and they have all this information up front in that email. I'm like, here's how many you get, here's the price per image, let me know how many you want. And then once they're done selecting their favorites, I'll go in. If I need to send them an invoice for more, I will. And if not, then I'll just edit them and send them back.
Awesome, easy peasy. Yeah, well, I think that's pretty much all the questions in the chat, and I just want to thank you so much for sharing all these secrets. I mean, you gave a lot of really good tips. If you guys missed anything earlier on, this will be available on replay. If you registered for the event, we'll send you the link just so that you have it handy. And of course, we want to know what you think about this, so let us know in the comments below afterwards. If you did register, we'll also send you that survey, as well as some of the Fujifilm deals since they sponsored us tonight. And so we hope to catch you guys again soon. Make sure that you subscribe and you hit that like button if you enjoyed what you saw, and we'll catch you all again very soon.